I'm Marcy Winograd, coordinator of CODEPINK Congress. Thrilled to be with you tonight and with my co-host, Medea Benjamin, and our featured guest, Sarah Lee Whitson. She is the executive director of DAWN, that's Democracy for the Arab World Now. And there's a lot to talk about. First, we will just review the norms, which include please show respect at all times, certainly to hosts, to our guest, and to each other. Also, try to stay on topic in the chat, and no disrespect will be tolerated. Okay, moving on, we're going to check in with Medea Benjamin for news updates. Medea, you're on.
Wonderful. Well, I'm sure you're all aware of the horrific deteriorating situation in Gaza, with Israel saying that it's going to totally occupy Gaza, not leave. The number of strikes has gone way up. The number of people getting killed every day is just horrific. Displacement all over again. And on top of that, the starvation. Israel is getting a lot of pressure and said they're going to start letting some food in. Yesterday, they let in a total of 5 trucks. Today, it was 93 trucks, but the UN and other agencies have said they haven't seen the distribution of food yet. It is absolutely catastrophic. There have been reports from the UN that 14,000 children are in danger of starvation in the next few days if food doesn't get in. And some of you might already be aware that two things. One, the food is there on the border. In fact, the UN says there are 9,000 trucks just across the border, 9,000 trucks ready to enter. And the amount that is needed is at least 500 trucks a day. The other issue is about who's going to distribute that food, and Israel has this terrible dystopic scene of having this new group created just for this, called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, that has no experience in Gaza, has just a terrible setup of how they're going to do this. The UN had 400 distribution points. They are going to have 4 distribution points. It's part of a military operation instead of a humanitarian one, and that's why the UN agencies and the most of the reputable NGOs have said we refuse to participate in this. But the pressure is really on Israel now, and we saw it over the weekend in the Nakba commemorations. Any of you don't know Nakba 1948, the displacement of 700,000 Palestinians. And this year there were major protests all over, including many places in Europe, the largest one being in the UK, in London, where there were hundreds of thousands of people. But there were also big protests in Italy, in Germany, in Ireland, Australia, Sweden. And all of this is putting a lot of pressure on the leaders of these countries to do something. We have 7 European nations who have written to Israel saying they must end the military assault and lift the blockade. We have the UK, France, and Canada saying that they must allow the food to come in, and are threatening sanctions. And I think Sarah Lee Whitson, our guest, will have something to say about those sanctions if we ask her about it. The UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, it was interesting to hear him say that the situation is intolerable. And so my point is to say that protest is putting the pressure on the countries that are then putting the pressure on Israel. And that's the only reason that they're agreeing to allow any humanitarian aid in at all. So we have to keep the pressure up. We were in Congress today when Marco Rubio was testifying. A number of our people got arrested protesting him during those hearings. He was in the Senate today. He will be on the House side tomorrow. And there have been so many protests, and I'm sure many of you on here participated in ones over the weekend, and thank you very much for doing that. And we just must keep the pressure up. And the last thing I wanted to say is that if you haven't read it, maybe we could post it here, the expose in the New York Times about Project Esther. It's nothing new. Some people might have heard about it already, coming out of the Heritage Foundation related to Project 2025. But the New York Times did a very good job framing it as a plan to destroy the pro-Palestine movement in this country and also to attack progressive universities and the progressive movement in general. And I think it's worth a read because it affects those of us and our organizations who have been involved in this work. So that is my update, and I will turn it back to you, Marcy. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Medea. So informative to hear what you have to say. All right. So building on what Medea said, I just want to recognize that Veterans for Peace, Code Pink, we support the hunger strikes that students and others are conducting across the country in solidarity with Gaza. Students at several Southern California universities and a quarter of the Cal State University campuses have now joined that movement to fast in solidarity with Gaza. One UCLA student was hospitalized, unfortunately. And at Yale, I'm reading that several are also on a hunger strike there. Elsewhere, in the White House, President Trump is happy to announce that he has an architectural plan for the Golden Dome missile system. So, think about that. That's launching hypersonic missiles in space. Offensive weapons in space under the guise of defensive weapons. But we know that successive administrations have adopted a nuclear posture review that says the United States will use nuclear weapons if, in the event that our allies' interests, not even our own, but our allies' interests are threatened. So now he's saying it will cost $25 billion initially. It's not in the budget yet, but he thinks it will be soon. And $175 billion to complete. I doubt it will only cost that much money. Elsewhere, Hegseth, Defense Secretary or Military Secretary, he is ordering a review of U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Okay, now what is up with all of these charges of anti-Semitism? We know what's up, right? This is the weaponization of these false charges to silence protests of U.S.-Israel genocide in Gaza. And we're seeing it in California with our Legislative Jewish Caucus introducing a bill to redefine nationality, to conflate anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, and to push for an anti-Semitism czar to police the classroom. We also read, unfortunately, that Representative Chris Smith, he's a Republican from New Jersey, and Jim McGovern, who we often rely on as a progressive from Massachusetts, will co-chair a congressional hearing of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission on a global review of anti-Semitism. So if you're in Massachusetts, you might want to ask Jim McGovern about that. And finally, the Qatar Economic Forum that's sponsored by Bloomberg kicked off in Doha today with an opening address by that country's prime minister and also Elon Musk and former CIA Director David Petraeus. With that, I want to go to our tech navigator, our organizer with Code Pink, who holds up the sky for us, Grace Siegelman. She's going to tell us about what's happening this summer. Grace.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. So today's our last Code Pink Congress for the summer. We'll be back in later August, September, no worries. But in the meantime, we have a wonderful series of amazing educational webinars. We're going to have Medea on. We're going to have Ann Wright on. We're going to have Claudia de la Cruz on. So many amazing folks to really talk us through a bunch of very big topics that we talk about here on Code Pink Congress that a lot of folks need to equip themselves for everything Marcy's talking about, everything Medea is talking about, to be in the streets, to be online, to be in Congress for Palestine, the people, and the planet. So I'm going to drop our link for the Code Pink Summer School series. It's going to be on Mondays throughout the summer, June 2nd through August 18th, and then we'll have a keynote graduation at the end as well. But you can RSVP while you're missing Code Pink Congress. You can come to those, and then we'll come right back. We'll have education, action, so many things to do. But yeah, just wanted to pitch that now, and I'll talk about it again later. But back to Marcy.
Thank you so much, Grace. And I just want to mention that if any of you have a headquarters and office for Zurich Insurance in your city, you would be much appreciated if you would drop off our petition to Zurich to stop insuring Maersk, the company that's shipping weapons parts to Israel. And we have distributed a petition saying, Zurich, get out of this insurance business for genocide. But we need that petition to be delivered. So please do check, see if Zurich Insurance is in your city and help us deliver those petitions. Now I'm going to go back to Medea to introduce our special guest.
Well, it's really a great pleasure for me to introduce Sarah Lee Whitson because I have just the highest regard for Sarah Lee and for the organization that she runs, which is DAWN, Democracy for the Arab World Now. It is an organization that supports democracy and human rights in the Middle East and was founded by Jamal Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist working for the Washington Post, who was assassinated by the Saudis. And Sarah Lee has been she was before the executive director of Human Rights Watch's Middle East and North Africa division, and she oversaw there the work of the division in 19 countries with the staff located in 10 countries. She is fluent in English, Arabic, and Armenian, and she serves on the board of the International Center of Justice for Palestinians and the Armenian Bar Association. She is really one of the most brilliant people that I have known and has such good politics as well. So Sarah Lee, we're just delighted that you are taking the time this evening to talk to Code Pink Congress. Thank you.
I'm so happy to be here and particularly honored to have any collaboration with Code Pink. I think you guys are such an amazing organization. I love the work that you do. You're such a fearless, brave, kick-ass group. So needed, so necessary. I feel so proud when I see another action by Code Pink. And, you know, I know that Medea, you guys have been at this for so many years. Just so grateful for the work that you guys do.
So Sarah, a lot has been happening with the Trump and his checkbook diplomacy in the Middle East and whisperings that maybe he doesn't like Netanyahu anymore. Is this going to make a difference? Give us your assessment of Trump's trip, what happened and why we should care.
I think that the Trump administration's approach to the Middle East is really an exponential, on steroids, natural evolution of what has been U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East for at least the past decade, primarily driven by elite interests, untethered from actual interests of the American people, completely disassociated and in fact damaging to the interests of the people in the Middle East, driven by the motivation of defense industry interests, securing access to cheap oil, and increasingly the influence and interests of foreign governments, particularly the autocratic regimes of the region, who are using their money and ability to spend that money lavishly on the American political system to extract concessions, primarily security from the United States. This, of course, is in addition to the foreign influence of Israel and its supporters and its backers, who have continue to dominate U.S. policy with respect to Israel and the region. What we saw is, the mercantilization of American policy, such that not only did Trump announce over $1 trillion in deals, let's see if these should evolve, but also tremendous profiteering by President Trump himself, his family, his associates, and the orbit of people who have shown their loyalty to Trump and are now cashing in with these deals and business interests that go beyond, the national interests of business interests in the region. And, in exchange, of course, what the United States has to offer is its muscle, is its brawn, a security protection from U.S. military bases, from the presence of U.S. forces to support the dictatorships and the apartheid regime of Israel in exchange for these financial transactions, which primarily and expansively are now directly benefiting the U.S. officials themselves. President Trump, however, threw a real curveball during this trip, announcing significant decisions that he made in the region without consulting with Israel. And this is definitely novel because the Biden administration, the Obama administration, multiple administrations, Republican and Democrat, have basically operated in the Middle East in particular by giving Israel a veto power or soliciting its consent before making decisions. But Trump took a different tack. Number one, he declared a ceasefire with the Houthis in Yemen after spending billions to put us exactly back where we were before he started the military attacks, not authorized by Congress, I should note, on Yemen, but at least only did that for 2 months as opposed to the 20 years of war that we saw in Afghanistan or the 30 years of war that we saw in Iraq. Number two, he negotiated the release of an American citizen, an American Israeli citizen, directly with Hamas without consulting with Israel and secured his freedom. I think this is the first time that the United States has engaged in direct negotiations with Hamas, at least reportedly. Number three, he lifted sanctions on Syria, reportedly, and we've yet to understand the details, but just like in Ukraine, securing all kinds of material concessions from the Syrian government, which has extensive oil and gas resources, which apparently President Trump has secured U.S. interests in exchange for removing sanctions on Syria, really just like a naked mafioso that puts a gun to the head of business owners and agrees to take the gun off their head if they pay. And finally, and most significantly, announcing that he was going to resume diplomatic negotiations with Iran to limit its enrichment for civilian purposes, again, putting us exactly back where we were before he canceled the nuclear agreement, the so-called JCPOA agreement with Iran. So on the one hand, these are very positive developments because they lean into President Trump's stated aversion to expanded military intervention and stated desire to prioritize America's business interests, America's financial interests, as well as his own and his coteries. And they're also significant because of the independence they reflect from Israel. I think all of this came as quite a shock to the Israeli establishment and the pro-Israel establishment. But I think if we had to analyze how these things came to be, the role of Gulf money cannot be minimized and ignored. And basically, the Gulf states outspent the pro-Israel lobbies, outspent AIPAC, outspent Miriam Adelson in amounts that they really can't even compete with. We're talking of trillions of dollars, basically to buy their security from a renewed war with Iran. A war with Iran would be disastrous for the UAE. It would be disastrous for Saudi Arabia. The first missiles that would fly, were there to be a war in Iran, would be on the gleaming towers, skyscrapers of Dubai. And the Emiratis know that better than anyone else. And so basically, they have bought their way out of an American war with Iran and outspent AIPAC in a way that I think really is causing a shock. My suspicion is that the quid pro quo with Israel, with the icing out of Netanyahu, has been to say, okay, you do what you want in Gaza and you stay out of our business, the rest of our business in the Middle East. I just want to warn people against taking too much comfort or relief from these developments, because while I'm sure that we all agree that avoiding war with Iran is a great outcome, removing those punishing sanctions on the Syrian people is a great outcome. However, they also reflect the increasingly authoritarian nature of our government, of President Trump, which really is just acting like Mohammed bin Salman, making decisions the way he does. He decides without a consultation, even with the US Congress, even with our own foreign policy establishment, even with the people who are supposed to be engaged in making these decisions, and just makes the decisions on his own, driven by overwhelmingly a desire for pecuniary gain and the circumstances that secure pecuniary gain, which is peace and stability. So, we now have a club of sociopathic, murderous dictator in a deal with a convicted rapist, cavorting with a genocidaire in Israel. And I can go on and on to say that it does reflect a deepening of the authoritarian tendencies of President Trump and authoritarian decision-making in the United States. Let me pause there. I hope I didn't go on too long with that, but I thought it was important to cover the different aspects of these developments. Sorry. Is that too much?
Medea has a question.
Oh, well, I really love the way you put it about them outspending AIPAC. I never thought of it that way. But I wonder how much you think Gaza and Israel was discussed behind the scenes, and if the Arab countries who have done nothing to stop Israel were at least putting pressure on Trump during his visit.
I think that they may have raised concern about the starvation of Palestinians, as well as much more concern about Israel's bellicose policies, the bombardment of Syria, the occupation of Syria, the bombardment of Lebanon, and now reportedly the planned bombardment of Iran. I suspect that those were higher on their priority list than the catastrophic policies in Gaza. I don't know how much the current announcements that Israel is going to start allowing some humanitarian aid to pass through is a reflection of that. I'm very, very concerned about this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's been established apparently by an Armenian businessman who's founded it, which again privatizes what should be a UN function of providing humanitarian relief, brings in US military contractors to involve them in humanitarian relief. And we all know what a racket that has been from Afghanistan, where billions were lost to these contractors, to Iraq, where more billions were lost to these contractors, and in a way that is actually apparently designed to force Palestinians to leave their homes, to congregate to 4 distribution centers where Israeli soldiers are nearby. From Israel's own statements, we know, designed to entice people, to use a mild term, if not coerce people, Gazans, into leaving Gaza. I think I want to underline and double underline that Israel's #1 priority and goal now is to force Palestinians out of Gaza, either by killing them or by pushing them out of Gaza so that they become someone else's problem. And I am concerned that President Trump, as he has said, sees this as a real estate problem. So they can have real estate in Libya, they can have real estate in Sudan, they can have real estate in Somalia. And the viciousness and cruelty of this, the outright genocidal nature of this plan. I mean, forcibly transferring children out of Gaza is the very definition of genocide in the Genocide Convention. I am extremely concerned about that, and I am extremely concerned about the survival of the Palestinian people in their homeland.
Yes, we share that concern. Sarah, a couple of things. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on with Qatar. It has the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, as I understand it. And they don't want to be bombarded. They don't want to be the target of retaliation should Israel bomb Iran. And in terms of that, I know Israel has tried to get successive U.S. presidents to invade, occupy, bomb Iran and has been unsuccessful. But with us selling or transferring these F-35, F-16 weapons to Israel, and if they use those against Iran, isn't that just, analogous, or isn't that the U.S. actually attacking? And in terms of the Ansar Allah movement, I know I'm all over the place here, but I have a lot of questions. The Ansar Allah movement, they said they're not going to attack U.S. ships. Okay, carrying weapons, they're not going to attack you. What are they going to do? What was the deal? What is the deal?
Well, taking your last question first, Ansar Allah has announced and from the beginning that their actions were designed to attack ships headed to or from Israel, and particularly including Israeli ships, even if they weren't flying under the Israeli flag. And that was their action to effectively impose an embargo on Israel, overbroad embargo, certainly, since it goes obviously beyond an arms embargo. But that has been their stated goal. And frankly, I wish that the entire world was supporting an arms embargo on Israel, which of course is what the International Court of Justice has urged the international community to do to end support of Israeli apartheid and occupation. And the General Assembly passed a resolution affirming the ICJ's decision and giving Israel a one-year timetable to end its occupation and apartheid rule, which sadly I don't think is going to happen. The Houthi attacks did not, to my knowledge, actually attack any U.S. ships because U.S. ships going to Israel were not going around from Yemen to get to Israel. But when the United States started bombarding Yemen most recently, this was specifically designed as military support for Israel and effectively made the United States a party to the war, a party to Israel's war, because it was actively participating in hostilities against a party engaged in hostilities with Israel. And so when the Houthis declared as part of the ceasefire that they won't attack U.S. ships, well, they weren't attacking U.S. ships before anyway. So I think that answers that question. With respect to your question about Qatar, I'm not sure I understood specifically what you're asking, but if maybe actually I should just ask you to clarify rather than go on with something that wasn't to the point.
Well, what do you think they would want to see happen? That way.
I think that Qatar has consistently stated that they want to see an end to the genocide in Gaza, and they want to see the emergence of a Palestinian state. That's not a position that's unique to Qatar. That is the position of the Arab League. That is the position of the Arab states that put forward the proposal led by Saudi Arabia, I think about 20 years ago now, and which still stands, which Israel has never accepted, offering normalization with Israel in exchange for the end to the military occupation and the establishment of a Palestinian state. Qatar Qatar's record is one that has supported many of the democratic movements, the democratic uprisings in the Middle East, in the region, since 2011 and the Arab uprisings there, but also importantly provided a refuge for those who fled when the revolution in Egypt, for example, and the establishment of democratic state was toppled. Many Egyptians involved in the democratic government sought refuge in Qatar, as did others who escaped the overthrow of democratic transitions in the Middle East, but also has served as a de facto basis for Palestinian officials, as well as Hamas officials, including Hamas officials, I should say. And it is that presence of Hamas officials that has particularly irked Israel, but also the presence of Al Jazeera, whose news reporting did so much to expose Israeli abuses on the ground. I mean, I think it's not an accident that Shireen Abu Akleh was murdered by the Israelis for the reporting that she was doing for Al Jazeera, as well as numerous Al Jazeera journalists and media workers who've been targeted by Israel, as well as the United States. I should point out the United States targeted and killed Al Jazeera journalists in Iraq during the second Iraq War. I think that Qatar is now engaged in a very delicate balance of securing its own survival. I remind people that during the first Trump administration, Saudi Arabia and the UAE had plans to invade Qatar. And indeed, it was Rex Tillerson, then Secretary of State, who put the kibosh on that. But they imposed a vicious embargo on Qatar for a number of years to punish Qatar for reporting, for having Al Jazeera, for reporting on Al Jazeera, and for being seen as a supporter of the political Islamists and political Islamist movements throughout the region. Fortunately, that embargo has been lifted, but Qatar is a tiny state trying to survive. The U.S. military base there is part of its security and security plan for survival. Buying the largesse of U.S. support with a $500 million plane and billions in weapons purchasers is part of their protection money that they pay to secure protection from the United States from their own Arab neighbors. Were it not for Turkish forces who arrived in Qatar during the first Trump administration, I'm pretty confident that Saudi would have rolled its tanks into Qatar in an attempt to overthrow the government there. By the way, just as Saudi tanks rolled into Bahrain to support the dictatorship there against the popular uprising in 2011 in Bahrain.
Well, Sarah, I think this goes to a question that was in the chat about who do these Gulf monarchs want protection from? And one is from each other, which is interesting, but also how deep is the truce between Iran and Saudi Arabia? Is Saudi Arabia really still worried about an attack from Iran? And how much is this protection from internal dissent? And are any of these monarchies really at risk of being overthrown by internal dissent?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a cascade of risks that these monarchies face, as would any government that is unelected, has no political legitimacy, and exists because it forces itself into existence. I think Saudi Arabia is one that would be particularly vulnerable to domestic dissent. There were popular protests in 2011 in Saudi Arabia. The king at the time did promise numerous reforms and changes in Saudi Arabia in response to the Arab uprisings. And so the biggest threat that they face, of course, is from their own populations. Every single one of these Gulf states, probably Qatar is the only exception, and that probably has to do with the fact that it's such a tiny population of a handful of families that is the state of Qatar, faced domestic uprisings, domestic resistance, domestic protest in 2011. And the U.S. security presence, the U.S. military presence is designed to protect them from their own people and designed to protect them from any military threat that may emerge. That may be other Arab states. I mean, these are countries who have had conflicts with each other. And by the way, there's no love lost right now between Saudi Arabia and the UAE because Saudi Arabia is now seen as a threat to the UAE in a way that it wasn't before, when it was just a sleepy backwater, underdeveloped state that was sitting on tremendous resources, tremendous youth, but under this aged, wizened rulership that had no idea how to change the country. That's changed, obviously, under Mohammed bin Salman. And now there's a great deal more rivalry between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, as Saudi Arabia wants to become the new UAE. There's that. I think that my own approach, my own thinking is that the Iran threat has always been overplayed and overblown deliberately by American defense companies and Western defense companies because it served their interest to dump probably trillions of dollars cumulatively of weapons into the Gulf to protect them against Iran. And I'm going to pause and get my charger. I see my computer is actually on low battery. But I think that this was, as I said, a deliberately overblown threat to persuade these countries to buy more and more weapons. But really, again, we have to understand these weapons purchases by these Arab states. The Gulf Cooperation Council, that's what they call themselves, which is therefore what we have to call them, because that is the price of U.S. military protection. That is the protection money. You have to buy weapons. You have to buy them even if you can't operate them. And, in these countries, they literally cannot even operate the equipment they're buying. They need American contractors to operate this equipment. They need the American software. They become completely beholden to a U.S. influence and control. And this is another reason why the United States has been apoplectic about the increased investment, increased purchase of Chinese weapons and Russian weapons by the Gulf Cooperation Council states, because that threatens their monopoly of arms sales to these countries. I'm going to pause there for 1 minute and grab my charger.
Yes. So I just want to remind everybody that we have a wonderful podcast called CODEPINK Radio, and check it out. It's codepink.org/radio. And Noor, who is our Palestine campaigner, Justice in Palestine, she was on recently talking about the history of Palestine. Very informative, excellent. I co-produce it now and then. And I interviewed Tig, Medea's significant other, who was in Malta with Ann Wright trying to get on the flotilla to Gaza. But then Israel attacked, we think Israel attacked the flotilla. So do check out CODEPINK Radio. All right, back with Sarah. Medea, do you have another question?
Yes, Sarah, I had a question about the sanctions that the UK and Canada and France are threatening to put on Israel. And I thought, oh, well, this sounds good. And then I read a Dawn statement. So if you could tell us a little more about that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. The UK, France, and Canada put out a very strong statement a statement, sort of an or else kind of statement to Israel about allowing humanitarian aid to Gaza, threatening, I think in their words, concrete actions. Those actions have not been specified, but we do know that they are what is up for negotiation now is the EU-Israel cooperation agreement, which grants Israel all kinds of trade preferences, and is very important to Israel because the EU is Israel's largest trading partner. And so I think it's important to say that there are no sanctions that have been proposed in the way that countrywide sanctions could otherwise be proposed. There is no arms embargo that's proposed. The only thing that we have understood the threat to be is ending or suspending the cooperation agreement that they have with Israel, which I see more as a withdrawal of a perk than an actual sanction, which is why it's simply not enough. And, you know, I hate to be in the position of someone doing something good and then we in the policy community complaining that it's not enough, and their response is, well, we could do nothing, and would you like that better? So I'm happy that they're taking the statement, but, you know, it is also disgusting that they've waited this long. Now you're noticing, now you're taking action. Imagine if they had taken this action in November 2023, when, by the way, we warned that this is exactly what the outcome would be. The completely predictable outcomes. They knew this was going to happen. They knew it was happening. Why did they wait this long? Nevertheless, I do believe that it reflects the increasing horror of the publics in these communities. In the United Kingdom, where there were mass protests just this past weekend, in Canada, in France, despite the efforts of their governments to suppress these protests, despite the efforts of these governments to silence commentators, discussions, meetings about what's happening in Israel. Yet still, the publics in these countries are overwhelmingly horrified by their country's support for Israel, their country's continued provision of weapons to Israel. And so, at minimum, the sanction that they should be considering is an arms embargo. I should note that they have also, and this was before and commenced during the Biden administration, passed sort of copycat sanctions that the Biden administration had implemented against individual violent settlers in the West Bank, which was sort of a crumb that Biden threw to us to say, see, we're doing something, or you know, because it supported their narrative and their pretense that, oh, it's just a few bad Israeli apples, not a system-wide thing, not an action against the Israeli government per se. Nevertheless, the British government just imposed sanctions on this vicious nut job Israeli settler. I'm blanking on her name, but she was featured in that BBC documentary.
Oh,
Daniela Weiss, I think is her name. Yes. And we are certainly going to be encouraging the UK and other countries that have adopted similar sanctions regimes against other Israeli settlers and settlement entities. But, you know, what we also have to know and understand, and I'm sure your audience knows this very well, is that the settlement enterprise is not the outcome or product of a few violent individual Israeli settlers. It is a state enterprise. It is a government enterprise. And everything the settlers do have the support and backing of the Israeli government.
You're on mute.
A question from one of our participants, and then I have a question. Are any countries or groups within countries, like Libya, in serious discussions with Israel or the United States about accepting Palestinians? So that's one. And then two, you know, you are the executive director of the Democracy for the Arab World now, DAWN, and we'd like to know more about your work and how people might want to, you know, get involved.
Sure. we don't know. We don't know the contours yet of what the Libyans may have negotiated, what Somalia may have negotiated in terms of accepting Palestinians. And much closer, of course, is Egypt and Jordan. So obviously, these are things that are being kept very close and secret. In Libya, however, we do know that the U.S. Has supported General Haftar in east of Libya. I think his sons, who are both U.S. citizens, as is Haftar, have been brought in. They are supposedly part of the negotiation to accept Palestinians. This is a militia that has controlled eastern Libya, committing horrible war crimes for over a decade now. Libya remains in a civil war. So the notion that anybody could be sent to Libya at any time, even a Libyan refugee should never be returned to Libya in these conditions, is just completely crazy. But if it does further materialize, it really is a ploy by the Haftar gang. I can only imagine and speculate, really, having very, very little information. So please accept that caveat, to secure their own support from the United States in their battle against the Libyan government in Benghazi and in Tripoli. So, I mean, on the one hand, it's hard to imagine how this would be executed. I think there was someone who was making a calculation of how many planes would be needed and how many ships would be needed, how many buses would be needed, et cetera, and so forth. On the other hand, I remind people that within the first 2 years or 3 years of the Syrian civil war, 6 million Syrians had left. And within 5 years, 12 million Syrians had left the country. So, 1.5 million Palestinians, not that big a number. And I don't want people to dismiss it as an impossibility. It is a possibility. We have to be fighting against this. We will not have the Palestinian people to talk about if we are complacent. Dawn, and we go by Dawn now, not the other words for a variety of reasons I won't bore you all with, is an organization that I think, as Medea mentioned, or you mentioned, Marcy, was founded by the late Jamal Khashoggi before Mohammed bin Salman murdered him in the Istanbul consulate in 2018. The organization actually never launched under him. He was just setting it up. I took over the organization in 2020, and we work fundamentally, our central goal is to reform U.S. policy in the Middle East to end support for abusive regimes there. We believe the United States is a part of the problem in much of the Middle East. And we focus on the governments with the closest ties to the United States because that is where we believe we have a moral responsibility for the harms that our own government is contributing to, like the genocide in Gaza. And that is where we believe we have the most chance for impact because our country is still mostly a democracy. And so that's why we focus on Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, Israel, Egypt. We do some work on Tunisia. One of our focuses is on accountability and holding perpetrators accountable, including American perpetrators. That is why we have filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court, a communication to the court, seeking the prosecution of President Biden, former Secretary Lloyd Austin, and former Secretary Tony Blinken for aiding and abetting and facilitating war crimes. We had a 215-page communication to the court, and we expect that this will be hanging over their heads, and who knows what might happen, just like we've seen the prosecution of a former Filipino abuser decades after his crimes. There is no statute of limitations for ICC prosecutions, and if the court survives, which is a big if at this point, because Israel and President Trump are doing everything they can to destroy the court. if the court survives the Trump administration, if the court survives the Netanyahu government, we hope that there will be prosecutions and can be prosecutions against these U.S. officials. We've also filed a lawsuit against the State Department for its decades of failure to enforce the Leahy Law against Israel, a law that requires the U.S. to suspend military assistance to abusive security force units. The United States has exercised this law to withhold assistance from tens of thousands of security force units around the world, but has never enforced this law against Israel. And so we've brought a claim under the Administrative Procedures Act to challenge this arbitrary and capricious failure to enforce U.S. law. The judge just ordered us to, the Trump administration, Marco Rubio and the State Department, to enter into a settlement negotiation with us. To our surprise, there are jurisdictional challenges here that are going to be difficult. Our primary goal is to withstand a motion to dismiss so that we can get discovery. We've actually started to get discovery from the State Department because we've also filed a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit against the State Department. And the State Department has finally agreed to start releasing documents, which we expect in the next 60 days. They're delay, obfuscate. But we believe in accountability and we believe in the judicial system. And it is a reflection of our faith in the judicial system and in the democratic institutions of this country and in the rule of law that is the means that we use to secure our ends. We are also extremely focused on fighting foreign influence in the U.S. government because we believe that our foreign policy has been corrupted by nefarious interests that do not represent the interests of the American people. And so we, I believe, Code Pink, are fighting to democratize our foreign policy, to eradicate this cancer of foreign influence, business interests, corporate interests that are really withering our country and withering our democracy and harming, of course, the American people, but harming the people of the Middle East really, really awfully.
Terrible. Well, thank you so much for all of your legal work. That sounds exciting,
Thank you.
You take these diabolical figures to court. Medea, you have a question before we leave?
Yes, thank you for all of that exciting work that Dawn is doing. And I saw in your press release that you were saying that the sanctions that are being threatened, not even being imposed by several of these European countries wasn't enough, and that what is needed is to call for a UN peacekeeping mission and a no-fly zone and cut off diplomatic relations. So are there any countries, because I think Robert in our group who's done a lot of work around the UN has been asking about the Hague Group, are there countries that are already calling for that, or what kind of pressure could we put on other countries since our own government is not nearly at that point yet?
Well, as a matter of fundamental principle, Dawn would never endorse a military intervention, unilateral military intervention for so-called humanitarian purposes. We've seen that sort of so-called humanitarian intervention used and abused by the United States in an imperial fashion, corrupting human rights discourse, weaponizing human rights for its political ambitions and goals. We would seek, however, and we have pushed for, and by the way, we called for this again in November 2023 for the UN Security Council to authorize action to protect civilians in Gaza. And this could very fundamentally and basically include a no-fly zone that would protect aid ships bringing aid to Gaza or others delivering aid to Gaza, that would protect civilians from the indiscriminate and deliberate bombardment of Israel, and peacekeeping forces on the ground that would support the Palestinian people who are trying to stay alive. Unfortunately, given the U.S. veto power, there's zero likelihood that the UN Security Council would adopt such a measure, unless, of course, Trump surprises us again, maybe abstains from such a move. But the UN General Assembly can pass a uniting for peace resolution that authorizes this kind of action. I don't know whether the UN General Assembly would have the power and ability to pull that off, but clearly that is what's needed, what's necessary at this moment in time. And I just want to remind people, back when ISIS was threatening the Yazidi people, a small community of people, a couple of thousand, had fled to the top of a mountain in northern Iraq. The United States was airdropping supplies within days of this threat against them. They were airlifting Yazidis within days that this happened. How come? How come they were so willing to rush in to protect the Yazidis? And just the opposite, providing the weapons and the tools to decimate tens of thousands of Palestinians. I mean, this is just crazy.
Yes, I'm occasionally on Instagram and I'm seeing planes from China dropping food onto Gaza, and I'm thinking, where's the rest of the world? Why aren't they
Oh,
joining?
wait, they're not doing that.
They're not. That's fake news.
Fake news.
Fake news. They faked me out. All right. Lastly, Sarah, what gives you hope? What gives you hope during these very disturbing times?
Code Pink gives me hope. I love you guys. I love you guys. You know, you just don't take bullshit and you call shit out and you say what people think and you say it out loud and you confront people directly. We need that kind of direct action. You know, what gives me hope is I know the American public opposes what Israel is doing. I know the American people actually believe in democracy. I know everybody wants to be free from torture. Nobody wants to be tortured. Nobody wants to be brutalized. And, you know, I hope that, you know, it's ultimately people power, right? It's people power. Those who are oppressing us are tiny and few. They're very powerful and very wealthy, but they're tiny and few. We have the people on our side. That's what gives me hope.
And with that, we want to thank you and unmute so our guests can thank you as well. Sarah, you have spent the hour with us illuminating the possibilities and the situation in the Middle East. And we're so grateful for your work with Dawn. It's very exciting work and important. So let's
Thank you for having me.
Sarah.
Come to our golf October 2.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you.
Date is
Thank you
really
so
so
much.
informative.
Thank you so
I
much.
heard you on Democracy Now! The other
Thank
day.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody, we got action.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we're going to move on to our action now. We're going to call Capitol Hill and ask our members of Congress, our House members, to take to the floor of Congress and demand that food be sent and water and medicine to Gaza. Where are the airlifts? You know, why are we still supporting the genocide in Gaza, the starvation of 2 million people? How outrageous. And where are the voices of our Congress members? What are they doing? So here's the script. We're going to ask you to just grab your phone and call your member of Congress. And if you don't have your member of Congress's phone number in your cell phone, maybe you can do that too. So please take to the floor of Congress to demand food, water, and medicine be distributed in Gaza. Gaza needs at least 600 trucks a day. What is it now, 5? This aid must be distributed to the United Nations and respected NGOs. I am urging you to act swiftly for the people of Palestine. Let's make a few calls.